If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, and if you enjoyed the channel, go ahead and give it a subscribe. Alright, now on to the episode. Alright, we are back. Happy New Year, everybody, and hope you guys had a happy holidays, no matter what kind of holidays it is for you guys. So, every day I'm trying to improve a little by little the stuff I do, and this time the little change is I got a little stand for my mic, so I don't need to hold it in my hand like some kind of fancy banana. So please tell me if that helps. But we did take a few detours since the last time we covered My Hero, but we are back again with Vigilantes. When we were last on the series, we met a few new characters, some fun and some insane, but let's come back to the main characters of the series, starting with Koichi. One thing that I know I did bring up, but that hasn't really come into play, is that unlike Izuku from the mainline series, Koichi is indeed a college student. So you may be wondering why Koichi has so much free time on his hands and doesn't need to balance his vigilante work, his college work, and his college friends. Well, one of those reasons is that he doesn't really have any college friends. This was due to an incident early on where he was too eager to invite a female student to his otherwise sad apartment, which led to a misunderstanding that he was some kind of creep, and that rumor sort of spread throughout campus, which hasn't really ever happened to me, but if anybody has any similar stories, please go ahead and share. So that throws out one of the three concerns, but how does Koichi balance the other two? Well, the answer to that is badly, as Koichi is struggling with his schoolwork. A female upperclassman by the name of Makoto sees him visibly failing, so offers to help with prepping for exams and quizzes if Koichi becomes her research assistant. As the subject that Makoto is assisting Koichi on was on Vigilantes and their conflicting relationship with the legal hero system, some kind of sociology class. This part of the volume was an interesting history lesson as it brings up some of the lesser known details of the My Hero Academia universe. So, for those who've read the mainline series, the existence of people with quirks coming into existence and the subsequent appearance of heroes has always been sort of hand-waved away as something that just happened. And in some sense, we learn more in just a few short pages in the spin-off than we do in the entirety of My Hero, because they don't want to focus on that kind of stuff. So when quirks first started appearing, the obvious first instinct of those who acquired them was to use them, to their own benefit of course, becoming the first generation of villains. As the police at the time were not properly equipped to tackle these newly superpowered beings, some other newly quirk people stood up to fight back these villains, becoming what are essentially the first generation of vigilantes. What had become the commonly accepted and most propagated tale was that those very same vigilantes would become the very first generation of legal heroes. What happened in reality though was that when the dust settled, only a tiny proportion of that vigilante population would actually go on to be actual heroes, mainly because the philosophy behind the official hero system laws was not really to license vigilantes and give them, a structure that they could work by, but rather just to define what exactly constitute a villain. So it's like working upwards instead of downwards. At the end of the day, it was decided that whether or not you were a villain was if you continue using your quirk without being authorized to. In that sense, anyone who wasn't a hero but uses their quirk would essentially fall into the villain category. There is some discrepancy on what if you use your quirk for everyday uses. Let's say you had a fire quirk, but your fire was really only big enough to light a cigarette, so you use your power instead of like a lighter or something. Would you then get treated as a villain? I imagine the answer is probably no, as there's probably some leeway, much like how many of us have probably jaywalked at one time or another, but the law more often than not gives us a pass, as it's really a small infraction. On to Makoto's side of the deal. Now that she has helped Koichi, she needed someone to aid in her search for the three vigilantes of Naruhata, the name given to our trio of Crawler, Popstep, and Knuckle Duster, as she's interested in these modern day vigilantes. Of course, she doesn't know that Koichi is a Crawler, but she still valued his knowledge of Naruhata, as it's the part of the town that he lived in. So the two decide to meet up the next day to do a little investigating. The two end up spending the day really just retracing the steps that Koichi and friends had gone through in past volumes. The more Makoto investigates, the more Koichi tries to hide the truth, and after a day's worth of effort, she mainly gets some survey results from citizens on Popstead, Knuckle Duster, and the Hauler. Right as they're about to split, Makoto grabs Koichi's hand, looks him in the eye, and asks him, "Are you the Hauler?" She does this because she herself also has a quirk which is essentially a polygraph test, meaning she can tell if someone is lying or not. Koichi answers no, and to Makoto's surprise, the answer is true. I think this was actually quite clever from the writer, as this would have been a plot device volumes in the making. Dear Dummies will need to return to past volumes where Koichi had the name Hauler labeled onto him, much to his chagrin. So when Makoto asked, "Are you the Hauler?" Koichi said no because he wants to be known as the Crawler. That's the thing about polygraph tests. Polygraph tests don't necessarily tell you the truth, but instead it tells you the truth of the person being tested. So for example, if you grab a colorblind person and ask them if the sky is blue and they say no, the polygraph test could still say that they are not lying even if the sky is indeed blue. Either way, we do cap off this snippet of the volume with the revelation that Makoto is actually the younger sister of Detective Naomasa, sharing some level of deductive abilities that led her to suspect Koichi in the first place. Either way, let's move on with the introduction of Captain Celebrity, another new character who is an American hero with Superman-like powers of flight, speed, and strength, enabling him to become a US top ranker hero. Of course, as there are no perfect beings in the My Hero universe, Captain Celebrity's character flaws, apart from his name, are rooted in his motivations as a hero. Although being able to do great things with his powers, he doesn't really do anything unless there's a guarantee of public favor. Before doing his heroics, he makes sure to have cameras on him and reporters on site for debriefing. He doesn't go above and beyond to help anyone as if there's nothing to gain, and of course just really loves the spotlight. When we contrast this to Koichi, who has average to middling power sets and is forced to hide his services, it's obvious the two clash in more ways than one especially. While other heroes like Ingenium require a support team to enable them to do their job under safe conditions for both them and the public, Captain Celebrity really just needs a strong PR team not only to get the marketing done right, but also to ensure that it doesn't turn to his lawsuit-prone womanizing ways that led him to have to move to Japan in the first place. Leading that PR team is Makoto, who seems to have found a way to deal with Captain Celebrity by using his wife's name to hold him by the balls. Figuratively, of course. Another new character introduced is Koichi's mother, who is a stereotypical overbearing Asian mother, and she gets to meet the people that Koichi surrounds himself with. One thing that is neat about her is that she has this fly swatter quirk which allows her to slap things from a distance. I do think this is a hilarious power to give to an Asian mother, especially as I'm sure she would be someone who would use that power to its full potential. Koichi, his mother, and Makoto go sightseeing, and during that trip, Quinn is up to more shenanigans and somehow turns a bus into a giant cat. Ingenium literally comes running in to save everybody, and once most are saved, him and Koichi, now suited up as the Crawler, head back out to take down the cat bus. During this endeavor, his identity does get revealed to Makoto, but during a critical moment when Koichi, with Makoto in his arms, is about to fly off a bridge, Koichi reveals an air jump ability, something he has never shown before, and that even Koichi was surprised at being able to do. What's funny is that off-panel, us as the reader finds out that Koichi's mother had always known that Koichi had sort of been able to levitate or float even as a baby, but as she was scared that he might get hurt, she would literally slap the baby onto the floor every time she saw him doing it. In other words, she pretty much conditioned limiters into Koichi from a young age so that even he doesn't know what he's capable of. That said, at the end of the day, and subsequently the end of the volume, everyone does make it back safe, with Koichi being revealed to Makoto as the Crawler. Well, that's another volume in the book, so to speak, even though a volume is a book, but you know what I mean. This volume had some good and some bad, but leaning more towards good in my opinion. This part felt like another world building set of chapters, and as such the plot didn't honestly move forwards too much. Some of the new characters were hits and some other misses, but the overall package was clean and fun entertainment. I think the biggest complaint was that the story sort of stalled here, and I think that's fair, but I also believe that this upcoming volume 4 will be more action packed. In fact, I might move away from making a single part correspond to a single volume and move towards a single part corresponding to an arc instead. As such, part 4 of this overall My Hero Academia Vigilante series will cover the entire volume 4 and dip its toes into the early parts of volume 5, as I think it tells a better story that way. The highlight of this volume was for me the backstory of how Koichi's mother screwed Koichi from a young age. I think that this part of the story really contrasts well with the awesome revelation and panel of Koichi pretty much double jumping in the air. Quinn coming back in the last chapter of this volume also helped us remember that there is indeed an overall plot, and we will get to her in the next episode. I hope you enjoyed part 3 of Vigilantes. I think I'm starting to get the hang of things, so perhaps things seem better now than they did at the beginning. Anyway, dummies, that'll be all from me. You on from Manga4Dummies, and see you on the next one. I'm off.